Not started yet.
Okay.
Just give me a
Oh,
go.
okay.
Okay, I think we can start.
Okay. Right. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone, and welcome to MedSchool Mentor. I'm Bernardo. I'm the Executive Coordinator for Global Outreach, and it's a pleasure to have you all here for another virtual shadowing webinar. So today I'm joined by an incredible panelist team formed by Jung Kim, our founder and CEO, Carlotta, our regional coordinator, and Camila, our communication coordinator. Now it's an absolute honor to introduce our guest and speaker, Dr. Megan Bauman. Dr. Bowman is a neo-match neurosurgery resident at Washington University in St. Louis. She completed her MD at Mayo Clinic Alex School of Medicine and also holds a master's degree in music and biomedical sciences from Georgia State University. Megan, thank you so much for joining us here today, and we're glad we're excited to see your talk.
Great, thank you so much for having me. Am I good to go ahead and start sharing?
Yes, sure.
Perfect. Okay. So let me just get rid of some things here. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending, and thank you to the Medical School Mentor team for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to just share my story with you. I think these kind of things are always very helpful for people going through the process, just to see kind of different iterations of people's stories, seeing the differences and experiences that people have, and ultimately where they end up in being in life and throughout their professional and personal careers. So before I get started, no formal disclosures. Kind of the one like caveat that I have is this is my personal experience and my philosophy that I'm sharing. Obviously, take what works for you, and don't take what doesn't work for you. But like I said, just to kind of give a little bit of an insight to my own personal story and experience. And so at least the way that I've got this short presentation segmented is first I was going to talk a little bit about my origins, where I came from. I was then going to talk about my journey to medical school, followed by my journey to neurosurgery, and then just kind of a couple of takeaways that I have from all of my experiences leading up until this point. So now starting off with at least where I come from, my origins. So I'm originally from Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. It's a fairly small city. As you can see here, it's about an hour north of the Montana border, about 60,000 people. Closest city to it is Calgary, which is about 3 hours away. So a little bit more spread out compared to at least other areas in the US. The thing about this part of Alberta is it's very cowboy country. This is a picture of the Medicine Hat Stampede here. So you can see lots of cowboy hats everywhere. There's barrel racing, Western horseback. This was our pavilion that we actually had all the high school graduations in. So very cowboy country roots growing up. It's also a very hockey-oriented community. And so, like a good Canadian growing up, I too also played hockey. My family, they own a sports store, a picture of which you can see right here. So that was started by my father and later passed on to my brother. And so that was somewhere that I also worked as well growing up. So working there from the age 10 all the way to 18 and spent a year after high school working there full time. So a big part of my upbringing was hockey and then kind of that Western culture a little bit. And so, looking at my journey into medicine, it actually started a little bit early in life. And so, this photo is thanks to my mom. But as a kid, I kind of had a little bit of a fascination for medicine. I think visiting the doctor, just really having a passion for the sciences, biology, and chemistry, really liking that person to person connection. And then I actually received a lot of care when I was younger from the Shriners Hospital in Spokane. So I used to make yearly trips there for my care. So just really immersed in healthcare when I was growing up and young and kind of thinking about that as a future career. But of course, in high school, I also had other interests as well. So I started learning piano from about age 10 years old. And then when I entered into high school, I picked up the saxophone. And I found that that was kind of a nice transition to go from piano to saxophone, especially since my hands are on the smaller side and I had troubles reaching some of the bigger chords in piano after a while. And so with saxophone, I picked it up a little bit late, so about grade 10, and I started taking some private lessons partway through high school. And I found that there was just so much that I had to learn and explore from this, and so much more I could dive deeper into. And so at the end of high school, I was kind of presented with the dilemma of with medicine as my ultimate career goal, or at least what I wanted it to be at the time, do I go straight into a pre-medical degree of some sort, either like biology or chemistry, one of the sciences, or is there a way that I could incorporate music into my path? And so I ended up choosing the latter. And so this led me to my undergraduate degree at the University of Saskatchewan. And so Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, this is the province beside Alberta, a little more north, a lot more snow, definitely colder than where I grew up. Um, but I enrolled in a Bachelor of Music program with saxophone performance as my main major. And really, this was a wonderful opportunity for me. I was fully immersed within music. I was taking music theory classes, music history classes. I was able to perform in our jazz ensemble. I received a jazz certificate towards the end of my degree. I was also able to really perform in wind orchestra as well and really expand my horizons by performing in the National Youth Band of Canada throughout my time in undergraduate. This also led me to compete in different competitions and let me perform outside of just Saskatchewan in my undergraduate degree. So the picture on the left here was from when I performed in Royal Albert Hall in London, in England. And then the picture on the right here was when I performed in Carnegie Hall at the end of my music degree. And then beyond just these other performances, I really tried to push myself with music competitions. So kind of going outside of my comfort zone of just like playing for myself, but seeing like how much can I really perfect this music and take it to that next level. And so really what I'm probably the most proud of, one of my accomplishments is this Federation of Canadian Music Festivals competition. It's a very Canadian music thing where everybody competes in these local music festivals and they ultimately try to get to the national level. So you go through local and then the provincial level and then finally the national level. And I was able to do this during my second year of undergraduate, and I was ultimately able to win the woodwind category within this. But really, I'll kind of get to this a little bit later. I competed in this competition during a very tough time in my life. And so the reason why I'm so proud of it is I think this was one of the first times I really recognized that if I keep my head down, I keep working at things, like I do have that fire within myself to achieve whatever I set my mind to, no matter the circumstances. So this was a very formative opportunity for me. Another very formative opportunity for me in my undergraduate was attending two different saxophone intensive camps. And so before I did this, I had competed in Canada, really kind of felt like I'd experienced a lot of what the saxophone community or saxophone scene in Canada had to offer. And then I went to these two camps, so the American Saxophone Academy and then the Frederick L. Hemke Saxophone Institute. And so unless you're a saxophonist, you might not recognize a lot of these faces, but these are the greats of saxophone or in the saxophone community. And so then going down into the States, I just realized how much more there was I had to grow and explore from the saxophone, how much more I could perfect in my playing and really kind of form that attention to detail. And so then what this really led to was a question in my mind is at the end of my music degree, do I now kind of transition on to medical school? Or now that I've got this whole new world of possibilities and opportunities open within my saxophone playing, do I do a master's? Do I kind of, delay my medical career and then pursue a master's? And at the time, it was a tough choice, but ultimately, I kind of chose myself, where I really wanted to take that time for myself, explore the saxophone more, really grow from the experience. And so that led me to pursue my graduate school or my master's of music at Georgia State University. And so this brought me down to Atlanta, so which was quite a jump from Canada. But again, this was a wonderful opportunity. It allowed me to spend lots of time in the practice room. This is where I really developed my endurance. I practiced for approximately 6 hours a day, figured out how to form good concentration and focus, making sure my practice time was effective, figuring out how to, again, perfect as much as I could, different techniques and strategies to do that. I was also a part of International Counterpoint, and I apologize about the blurry logo here, but this was a woodwind trio that was formed with 3 graduate students, including myself, so saxophone, flute, and clarinet. And I think what was really special about this group is that we were 3 very like-minded individuals. We practiced really well together. We had kind of the same vision of what we wanted to achieve as a group. And this was also kind of a new trio combination where there wasn't that much music written for it. And so we actively sought composers to write for us. We found prearranged trios and then we transcribed them into our configuration with saxophone, flute, and clarinet. We also had the opportunity to serve as the resident ensemble for Cortona New Music sessions, which brought us to Italy, where we were able to perform a recital and then ultimately receive a commissioned work from that. So just, I think, a really great experience overall. I also worked with a saxophone quartet. And so I feel like this experience was helpful, again, from kind of like that teamwork standpoint, but then especially when you're dealing with like similar instruments or the same instrument, but in different pitches of it, figuring out how to lead, how to support each other, just move as an ensemble, really working together. I also performed a lot at NASA, and so I kind of always make the joke, most people know NASA as like the space related one, at least in the saxophone world. This stands for North American Saxophone Alliance. Whenever we went to the conference, we'd always joke around that it's saxophones in space. But it was it's kind of like the AANS CNS equivalent for neurosurgery. This was that saxophone equivalent. So was able to present there, perform there. Again, a really good experience. And so then at the end of my master's degree, kind of the next logical step would have been if I were to stick in the music area, going on to my doctoral of musical arts. But towards the end of the degree, I kind of realized that saxophone had served its purpose for me. I really enjoyed what I had learned, but I was just eager and itching to get onto a career in medicine. And so then I was left with another dilemma. Throughout my undergraduate degree, I had completed a chemistry minor, so I had had most of my pre-medical prerequisites completed, but I was still missing a lot of biology prerequisites. And so then I was left with a dilemma. Do I try to cram these prerequisites into a couple semesters worth of work, take the MCAT after only 6 weeks of studying, apply to medical school essentially on the very last day that applications were open and hope that I get in? Or do I delay myself by about another year and a half? And this was after a 2-year delay already, and really put that effort into my medical school application that I would be proud of. And so I ultimately chose the latter. And so that resulted in me doing some post-bac work, but then kind of having a little bit of, like I said, that year and a half gap year. And so with that, I was able to apply for and get into graduate school again at Georgia State. And this was a Master's of Science in Biomedical Science as the concentration for that. And this allowed me some really wonderful opportunities to prepare me more for medical school and to kind of transition from that music mindset more to that sciences mindset. And so some of the courses I took, I was able to do a surgical anatomy class, which was studying cadavers, a pathophysiology class. This photo here was from a study abroad trip in Greece where we were able to go into the OR and gain that shadowing experience. I also served as a graduate teaching assistant as well, where I instructed an undergraduate course in medical physiology. And then this was my first time or introduction to anatomical research. So I served as a graduate research assistant looking at posterior cervical anatomy. And so, like I said, a really great opportunity that I'm so thankful that I did to really gear myself towards medical school. Some other things that I did along the way. So in order to keep music within my life, I volunteered at the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra as a greeter. And then to further delve into medicine, start to interact with patients more, I served as a volunteer at both Emory Winship Cancer Institute and at the Emory Clinic. And so then after all of my medical school, my medical school applications were submitted, I got some acceptances. I ultimately chose to attend Mayo Clinic Alex School of Medicine. And so really what stood out to me, or the reason why I went to Mayo, was the small class size was a huge selling point. As a musician, music schools are very small, tight-knit communities. A lot of times I had classes about 20 students or so. And so that small class size of Mayo really appealed to me, along with the remarkable facilities, the faculty, and then just the students also too that I met along the way. And so that kind of leads me to the third part of this, which is now my journey to neurosurgery specifically. And so really this traces back to my father. So unfortunately, my father was diagnosed with glioblastoma when I was 18, the summer before I entered into my undergraduate degree. And then he passed away after my first year when I was 19. And so this was a very difficult time in my life. It was a very difficult thing to go through. And I actually kind of took neurosurgery off the table for me, where I said, I want to do medicine, but I don't want to do neurosurgery just because of how difficult this was for me to go through. And so when neurosurgery kind of came back on my radar was actually during graduate school. I was doing a presentation on glioblastoma for one of my neuroscience courses. And I started to look at what research was out there. And what I found is that there were a lot of neurosurgeon scientists that were working towards curing this very terrible disease. And so that kind of got me thinking about just in neurosurgery in general, how not only is there that ability to be able to operate as well and help people through using your hands essentially, but then there's also that research component where you can make a difference in the clinical outcomes of so many of these terrible neurosurgical diseases. So then going into medical school, I had neurosurgery on my mind. I started shadowing in the OR. I got involved in research fairly early. At the same time, I still shadowed other areas of medicine just to make sure and kind of like process of elimination, really make sure that neurosurgery was right for me. But kind of one of the bigger steps that I took was getting involved in a research lab of Dr. Ian Parney, looking specifically at extracellular vesicles in glioblastoma. And why this was a really big step for me was because I had no research experience or no lab research experience up until this point. Everything was new, where a lot of people from undergraduate knew how to master a Western blot inside and out. But for me, doing cell culture, I had to learn it completely from scratch. And so kind of, taking a breath, learning it step by step, recognizing that even though I was behind, these are skills that I would learn and eventually come to acquire. Kind of similar thing with like publishing manuscripts. I remember feeling so silly asking questions about how many citations should I have, so on and so forth. But just, being able to ask those questions, get that experience has been very beneficial in the long term. And so at the end of my first year, I applied for the NREF Medical Student Summer Research Fellowship, which I was luckily awarded as a first-year medical student, allowing me to complete that research. And then I was also awarded the best abstract from the Medical Student Summer Research Fellowship by the NREF, which allowed me to present my research over here in Philadelphia at the AANS conference back in 2022. And then just continuing on with that research and really diving deep. And again, this was my first big presentation. It was a huge step for me, but just kind of taking it one step at a time, really leaning on my mentors for that support. But one of those fond memories I look back on now. And so then kind of moving forward in my medical school neurosurgery exploration phase, I would say, I started to become introduced to people on the skull-base side. So there were some really wonderful skull-base surgeons at my medical school who I started doing research with. I started going into their ORs, and I just really found this fascination about the intricate anatomy of the skull base and the need for the careful manipulation of surrounding neurovascular structures. This led me to do more skull-base research, started attending and presenting at the North American Skull-Base Society, different conferences there. And then I ended up doing research with Dr. Maria Paracelda, who is a former Broden Fellow. And so as I was doing research with her, it started off as actually doing a peripheral nerve dissection in her lab. But then the opportunity presented myself where I could be a part of her lab and do a research year where I would learn the techniques on how to inject the arteries and the veins and prepare the specimens, how to dissect in a true Rowan fashion, making sure that the edges were perfectly smooth, that the lighting and that the angles were all trying to show exactly what you're trying to show. And for me, this was such an invaluable opportunity, not only to like learn those techniques, get them under my belt, but then really kind of contribute towards more educational material, which was something that I was very passionate about from my days as a teaching assistant. And so I spent a year working in her lab. This is one of my dissections here, looking at the arteries of the insula. I also worked on creating 3D anatomical models of these dissections, again, to be used in an educational format. But like I said, kind of another delay in my career to becoming a resident, but something that was so valuable that I hope to be able to, or that I can now use, not only in residency, but in my future career and beyond. And so some other things that were very impactful for me as I went through medical school, I was a part of the Women in Neurosurgery Medical Student Committee, and I served as the events co-chair for 2 years. And these are my 2 co-chairs over those years there. But really, this was such an impactful experience because we built this from the ground up, the Medical Student Committee as a whole. Really formed an organized structure for specifically the events subcommittee, where we're able to do over 20 events a year, 1,600 participants, and just really start to kind of make a mark, especially for medical students and female medical students, providing different resources for trying to address barriers for people entering into neurosurgery or providing resources for people trying to match. And so this is something that, again, I'm very proud of, worked very hard on with the rest of the team, and has a lot of great things coming out moving forward. Some other things that I worked on was SheMD, so female physicians. Specifically, I was a content editor for their website, so taking posts from female physicians about the female experience in medicine and just sharing that. I served as the student liaison for the American Association of Neurological Surgeons interest group at my medical school. I was also the Music Link regional coordinator for Rochester. So this is a nonprofit that provides free or reduced costs to music students, elementary school through high school students in need. And then I also served on the Mayo Clinic Alex School of Medicine admissions committee, which just gave me the opportunity to meet so many wonderful pre-medical students, hear about their journey, and then ultimately help to form future medical school classes at Mayo Clinic. And so now kind of taking this all together where I'm at now. So as was mentioned, I have matched at Washington University in neurosurgery. This is my husband right here in both of these photos. So he matched into ENT at WashU as well. We completed the couples match and we're just so excited for this next chapter. Looking forward, I'm very excited to be starting off my residency. I still have interest in neuro-oncology, skull-based surgery. So hopefully being able to continue research efforts and endeavors, learning how to be an excellent neurosurgeon is very high on my priority list. And then just serving as the first 2 physicians in both mine and my husband's family. And so kind of the last thing that I just wanted to go through real quick was some lessons that I've learned throughout my experience here. And so really there were kind of 3 things reflecting back on all of this that I feel like I could at least talk about, despite my relatively short journey compared to other people I know that have presented at this platform. But the first thing that I thought about was just embracing your uniqueness. And so I really found that from being a music major, trying to transition into science, how I had kind of that atypical background. But I feel like it gave me a lot of qualities, a lot of insights I might not have otherwise gained. Kind of the same thing about my research year, was a little bit atypical compared to most, but just like really embracing that uniqueness, really letting your passions drive you, I think is the best thing that you can do with each step throughout your journey. The second point was about patience. So being patient and knowing that you'll get to where you're going in due time. And so I kind of mentioned this, how I had that decision about, do I pursue music even though I know it's going to delay me? Do I do that master's in music even though that's 2 years extra? Do I take that additional gap year just so I can really perfect my medical school education or my medical school application? And then doing that research here in medical school. And so a lot of that, I think, was a journey of patience. But I mean, I wouldn't change it any other way. There were so many experiences that I'm so grateful for. I don't think I'd be in the position that I'm in right now if I hadn't have had that patience and kind of taken those little bit of detours throughout life. And then the third thing was don't fear the unknown or the unfamiliar. And so for me, going into science courses, to graduate school in science, with having a music background, there were a lot of courses that, as a graduate student, like in music, I had to take with freshmen that were just entering in. They had a lot more fresh knowledge of their high school classes, where for me, it had been years. So just kind of having that patience that even though it was kind of very unknown or it was a big step for me, it was something that I wanted to not only do for myself, but I knew it would benefit me in the long run. So having that humility to ask the questions to kind of get through those tough scenarios. Or then even joining a lab in medical school. That was a very daunting thing for me to do. It was something extremely unknown and unfamiliar to me, but just having that patience with yourself, giving yourself grace to be able to acquire that information and knowing that it's going to pay off in the long run. And so with that, that's all I have for my formal presentation. I hope at least hearing that journey was helpful. I'm looking forward to answering any sort of questions that you all have. And thank you again for being here, and a big thank you for Medical School Mentorship for having me here.
Thank you so much, Megan. It was really interesting, your presentation. So, to don't waste time, I think that maybe we can first let the audience ask them their question. What do you think, June? Can you please make panelists the guys that have questions for Megan?
I think you can go ahead, Carlota. They haven't joined yet as a panelist.
Okay. So I have a question for you regarding the preparation for the matching. So yesterday we have done a webinar with Dr. Chandram about how to ace our sub-internship in neurosurgery. So I know that you have been an outstanding sub-I in Thomas Jefferson, but I think that also the public would love to know which are like your suggestion on how to really ace our sub-internship, but also like how to choose the specific program, like from a geographical point of view, or maybe because I don't know, there are some programs that have higher attendance for like female, or like any kind of strategies that you use at the time.
Yeah, so I can definitely talk about my strategies. So I did my sub internships at Cleveland Clinic and at Thomas Jefferson University. And so for me, my journey is like a little bit unique because I did do the couples match with my husband. So for us, we were definitely needing to balance out his wants in ENT, my wants in neurosurgery. But regardless, at least for me, I was looking for places I knew were going to provide an excellent operative opportunity for me. And so I think that what I did, it was a lot of kind of like word by mouth, talking to mentors, neurosurgical residents at Mayo who I was close with. And so that's how I came across Cleveland Clinic. I heard really great things about their operative experience. They have a really great structure there in terms of being able to have a lot of flexibility with their 2 years of research time. And then something that was also important for me was resident culture. So places I knew that the residents got along with well. And so this is kind of like where I'm getting at answering your second part of the question here is for me, at least knowing that I was going to do Cleveland Clinic, my home program was Mayo Clinic. They're both in the Midwest. So at least in my mind, when I was choosing my sub-Is, I wanted to make sure that I did have geographic differences, just so I didn't kind of shoehorn myself into a single geographic preference. But then I also wanted to look at different program types as well. So Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic are very similar institutions where they're both very resource rich. Where I wanted to try to find a program that was a little bit different, a little bit more of kind of like in the middle of a city, a little bit busier from the trauma, that operative standpoint, things kind of getting like rushed in the middle of the day. And so with Thomas Jefferson, again, things on my checklist, I heard that they were great operatively. I heard that they had a really great resident culture. And then to kind of contrast with the other two, so it's located in the Northeast to show a little bit of that geographic preference. And then this is also located in the middle of Philadelphia. So very busy operative experience. And so I think kind of a good strategy, and or at least this is what I use, is to try to not necessarily count yourself out from other neurosurgery programs. So showing that like in selecting your sub-Is, you're willing to live anywhere in the country. It's not a single geographic preference that you have, and that you're willing, or you can also thrive and work in different neurosurgery environments as well. So more kind of like private-demic, like Mayo and Cleveland Clinic, or more that public hospital setting like Jefferson, so that you are able to attract interviews and then also get interest from all across the neurosurgical programs. In terms of what makes an excellent sub-I, I mean, again, this is just speaking from my own experience. I'm sure the webinar yesterday was great and has a lot of valuable information. But really, I think it's just about being someone that residents want to get along with. And so with that, it's knowing not to necessarily be the loudest person in the room. I feel like there's a lot of pressure to like want to have to socialize a lot and like be friendly, and of course be friendly, but just kind of knowing like you don't have to be the loudest person in the room. You just have to be a really good hard worker, but that also doesn't necessarily create additional stress or burden for the residents. I feel like a lot of times when medical students are like, okay, I'm gonna like do my best, I'm gonna give it my all, sometimes like being like it can overburden residents, always like bugging them every 5 minutes about, is there anything I could help with? Can I do this? Like it can create more work for them. So things that I would do is I would just try to like listen to any sort of task that could be done, write them down on my list and say, hey, I heard that this needs to be done. Would it be helpful for me to go and do this for you? Rather than asking them and trying to get them to generate something for me to do, I would present them with like, will this be helpful for you? Or sometimes like when I heard like a chief saying like, hey, we need to get more information about this patient in the middle of sign out. There wasn't anything I was going to do in the middle of sign out that could help the team. So the best I could do was do a deep dive in the patient chart and then ultimately send that information to the intern. So kind of, I think, looking for those little ways to help out with the team. And again, just kind of being a good, friendly person to be around, I think is what gets you a lot or far along in the sub-Is.
Okay, perfect. But so you didn't do a sub-I in your current like residency program, right?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you think that is not necessarily it's not necessarily doing a sub-I in your like top choice program?
So what I would say is that I think statistically speaking, it's easier to match into your home program or one of your away programs. And so if there is a program that someone has identified as being their top program, I know that sometimes there's fear about like, oh, well, what if I go there and I mess it up during my sub-I and, it's going to exclude me from there. I think you need to be conscientious of like doing well and performing well at your sub-I, but for me personally, that wouldn't be a reason not to do a sub-I somewhere. So if you do have that top program, I actually would strongly recommend that you do a sub-I at that location in order to try to improve your chances of ending up there. For me, WashU happened to be a pleasant surprise along the journey of interviewing, where it's somewhere that I knew was very, very strong. But during my interview day, I just had such a wonderful time talking with the faculty, talking with the residents. I came back and did a second look and absolutely loved the experience. And it was somewhere that I just found like aligned with me from what I saw based on the interview day, hearing feedback from the residents and other individuals. And so in my case, while it wasn't necessarily required to do that, I think it kind of more serendipitously worked out for me. And so if, again, my advice is if someone knows where they want to end up or they have that top program, I would definitely do a sub-I for there if they can do that.
Okay, perfect. So, Cami, like, do you have any question for Megan?
Yeah, sure. I have a question about the match. Many students find this process kind of like exciting, but also at the same time very overwhelming, because you need to choose which programs to rank and navigate these interviews and making the final decisions. So, what would be your top advice regarding this? Or like ranking, what to pick first, the interviews?
Yeah, so I would say, so I think what you're referring to, so currently this last year, there were 25 signals that were allowed within neurosurgery. And so the signals process was something that they started a couple of years ago. And so at least this year, what I've heard is that the signals have kind of made it where it's kind of like a soft cap on the number of interviews that you're going to get, where, yeah, people will occasionally get interviews from places that they didn't signal, but the vast majority of the interviews are places that you signal. And so I think being very wise about the places that you signal, because essentially those are kind of the places that you're mostly expecting interviews or to get interviews from. So, in terms of advice, I would say like it's never too early to start thinking about different places. So, like if you're interested in neurosurgery, kind of like starting to gather some information about places peripherally, reaching out to more senior medical students, recently matched medical students, and kind of those like younger residents because they've just interviewed at a lot of these programs. They've kind of got the most up-to-date information. So, kind of starting to figure out, like, what are the programs? What do they have to offer? What's kind of the culture they're like? But then I think at the same time, when looking at programs, also kind of starting to figure out what you want as well out of a program. So, do you want just purely that operative experience where there's that opportunity to do an enfolded fellowship at the end of your residency? Do you want 2 years of dedicated research? Do you want some flexibility? Does city matter? Kind of those things. Like that's equally as important. And so then that kind of gathering that information allows you when it's time to actually figure out what schools you're going to say no to kind of figure out like what schools fall within those buckets of things that are my priorities and things that I want. Kind of one thing that I would say is adding a little bit of variety into the signals list because you can only really know as much, gather information as much ahead of time, but until you're actually there and interviewing, things might change a little bit where you went in saying like, oh, I want like a super academic program with 2 years of research. And then as you go along the interview process, you're like, wait a sec, I actually don't want that. And so then that's where it's good to kind of like, I would say have some variety of program types, like a little bit. And then also to just kind of assessing your own competitiveness. So don't open up Doximity and say, oh, these are the top 25 programs, so I'm just going to rank those. But kind of like looking at yourself as an applicant, having a good mixture of programs, and then having a mentor or someone be able to objectively tell you, like, okay, this seems to be a good fit, kind of as to where your competitiveness is versus not. So just again, having those honest conversations with yourself, it's never too early to start thinking about it and then having that variety.
Thank you so much.
Again, so we have a question from the audience who actually has a similar background as you. Her name is Madison, studying neuroscience and dance at the University of Michigan.
Mhm.
And she's interested in the intersection of arts and medicine. So, what connections have you experienced between music and your work in neurosurgery? Do you think the music has benefited or influenced you, personally or professionally?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so cool to hear someone having a similar experience to me. We always need more people in the fine arts entering into medicine, in my opinion. I think that medicine has been, or sorry, not medicine, music has been very, very influential for me. And that's why, as you could see by my presentation, a lot of it was about kind of my journey in music. But I think kind of the intersection is a lot of the ways that you go about practicing when you're in the fine arts. So I'm sure it's similar in dance, but at least in music, figuring out how do I perform my best. And of course, there's always going to be inherent problems. There's no, as much as I mentioned perfection, there's no such thing as perfection in music. It's always striving for perfection, but there's always going to be ways to try to like improve your phrasing in order to try to convey music differently. And then, especially because it is so subjective as well. And so I think having that kind of almost growth mindset ingrained into you where you aren't just like, okay, I've reached the finish line and now I'm done. But it's always, what can I do better? So how can I make this like sound smoother? How can I make this like actually convey what I'm trying to do? So identifying kind of those issues it was a skill I learned in music, but then also too, how do I fix those issues effectively? So not just doing the same thing over and over and over again, but what are different ways and strategies that I can employ to address this issue? And so those are skills that have transferred perfectly over to medicine, not only from like the academic side of like, okay, do I understand this concept in medicine enough? If I don't, what are ways that I can like really focus in and study as opposed to just doing like rote memorization? Like, are there different techniques that I can use? But then also too, in kind of like that practical skills part, and that's something I'm going to be developing a lot more in residency, but even more like preliminarily as a medical student when I'm not tying. Is there a way I can make this more effective? Am I doing extra movements or can I be a little bit more smooth with my movements? And so I think, like I said, having that growth mindset, knowing how to kind of like use that analytical part that I used in music to further my music and try to perfect it, and then to also address that, I think are skills that I've been able to transfer up until now and that I look forward to transferring more throughout neurosurgery residency.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you so much for your presentation. I really like this unique background. But something that I would like to know a little bit more, what made you pursue your master's and your medical school in the USA rather than in Canada?
Yeah, so for me, so what first brought me down to the US was my master's of music. And so that was really kind of, there was just so much more opportunity I felt like there was in the United States for that, and just so much more that I had to grow from it. And so then at the end, it was kind of a question of should I now go pursue medicine in Canada? And if I were to pursue medicine in Canada, I probably would have done like my pre-medical schooling in Canada, and like kind of the post-bac graduate school there. But ultimately, for me, I wanted to try to stay down in the States for medicine, just because, like I said, growing up in Alberta, the cities weren't as interconnected. Like, closest big city from me was 3 hours away. The next closest one was like 6 hours away. And when I moved down to the States in Atlanta, I really enjoyed how much more interconnected the cities were. Or just, I think, kind of like the geography of the United States. There was also a lot more kind of, I feel like, diversity of experience. I thought that there would be more opportunity within medicine as well, just from like a career perspective, whether or not it was neurosurgery, but just more opportunities to attend conferences, network with other people, and just kind of really expand my horizons as much as possible. And so I actually did end up applying for medical school in Canada at the same time, because for me, it was most important to become a doctor. But luckily, I was able to get in medical school in the States. And so that's why I ended up staying here for that.
Yeah, I have another question. Starting something new about you're becoming a new intern can be very exciting, but also a little nerve-wracking. Are there any specific parts of your upcoming internship that you're feeling like anxious or that you've been thinking a lot about lately, or also like also you're something that you're very looking forward to do?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, anxious probably about the whole thing, but no, I think like you said, it's very natural, at least in talking with other individuals, to I feel like have kind of that nervous energy coming into being an intern. I think for me, it's just knowing it's that drinking from a fire hose analogy. So people tell you about that coming into medical school. I think the same thing is true of residency, but like, times 1,000. And now the orders that I'm putting in, the notes that I'm writing, they're actually being used for patient care. Whereas a medical student before it was kind of more of an exercise. And so I think having that responsibility, being able to take in and absorb as much as I can. And I think just kind of like an exercise of patience, of knowing that like I'm not going to know everything by any means the first day or even within like the first month or probably that first year, but just knowing that as long as I'm patient with myself, I'm providing myself the opportunity to grow, to try my best, that eventually I'll be able to get there. So not being too hard on myself off the start and beating myself down is kind of, at least in my head, the mental game that I'm playing going into it. But then in terms of what I'm excited about, this is something that I've been working for a lifetime essentially. So now I'm finally here. I'm able to be a doctor to learn neurosurgery. So as much as I say that there's that anxiety, I think that there's definitely kind of that counterment of the excitement from this new journey and being able to push myself to learn those skills and to ultimately serve patients, which is something I've been looking forward to for years.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Mohammed. So thank you for the wonderful presentation and taking time out of your day to talk to us. My question is relatively simple, but what's your best advice for raising M2? Oh, Mohammed, are you here? Do you want to finish the question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure thing. Sorry, my Wi-Fi is just very glitchy right now. But thank you for taking time out of your day. I really appreciate this. It was all very helpful. My question is relatively simple. So I'm currently a rising M2 interested in neurosurgery, and I was just wondering, what would be your best advice as a first year neurosurgery resident who had a successful like residency application cycle on maybe some goals I should have and like expectations I should set for myself like moving forward from this point, and how to maximize the research opportunities I get presented with and the projects and just to make the most out of them so I can be successful, get to the
So you cut out a little bit at the end, but I think I get the gist of your question. So to kind of start off the beginning, in terms of what you can do as a second year. So first and foremost, make sure you do well in medical school. So don't go too many steps ahead, because we are like, as a medical student, you are there to learn to be a doctor. So making sure that like even things outside of the neuroscience, making sure you understand nephrology, cardiology, so on and so forth. And so just like making sure you can dedicate enough time to that. But then I think it's also good to, like you're doing, looking forward to the future and saying, I've got this interest in neurosurgery. It is a competitive match. So what can I do to like better my chances for that? And so I think kind of like one of the best things to do is to start building a team, or not a team, but kind of like a mentorship network behind you to be able to support you through that journey. And so what I mean by that is really starting to like show a lot of face time, whenever you're able to, with your home neurosurgery department. So starting to go in, shadowing people, both in the OR. Clinic is somewhere that I shadowed a lot. And I actually found that like very, very helpful because it allows you to get to know the neurosurgeons a lot better. It's kind of more, it's a better opportunity to ask questions because it's not so like hush hush, like we're trying to concentrate as much. It lets you learn a lot about like different pathologies, a wide variety of pathologies. So I personally spent a lot of time in clinic shadowing, especially during my second year. And then kind of like starting to like show up to things like different grand rounds, any sort of educational events that the department puts on, as again, as long as medical students are allowed. I can't speak for all departments, but really kind of starting to form those longitudinal relationships in neurosurgery. Because ultimately, when you go into the match, it's going to be those relationships that are very important. So having a letter from your chair or your PD that says like, I've known him for multiple years. I've seen him in clinic. I've seen him in the OR. He's like, highly regarded within our department. Like that's a very powerful letter. When it comes to going to sub-Is, if there's like specific sub-Is that you like, those people that are in your corner can reach out and help you get those sub-Is. And then again, if there's a program that you like, those people can also reach out to those programs after the interview process and really advocate for you. So I think like definitely building your mentorship network within neurosurgery is like something that I would recommend. And you don't want to do it all at once. I think that's kind of another misconception is people say, okay, I need to go in and I need to shadow everybody in the department right now. The earlier you start, the more you can kind of like ramp it up and build it up so that you're not too much too soon for the department. So just starting to shadow a couple of people, then adding on some others, and then like keeping those relationships is what I would recommend. And then from a research perspective, I think that in order to be efficient with research, I think at least for me, what I did. So I am someone who did research starting very early medical student in medical school as a first year medical student. But I gave myself kind of like small realistic goals. So I started off with systematic reviews and I said, okay, I'm going to start screening these abstracts and I'm going to do 50 a night for the week. And I would do all of my stuff that required a lot of brain power. So studying for my exams, so on and so forth first. And then I would kind of like do the screening afterwards. And then I would be like, okay, this weekend I'm going to write the introduction. This weekend I'm going to write blah, 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 blah. And so I think that as opposed to kind of like trying to like worry about cramming research all into like a single day or anything like that, just figure out those small areas where you can incorporate it into your schedule and what also works best for your schedule without sacrificing your medical school studying. Because if you fall behind on medical school studying, then everything else has to halt, including research. So kind of goes back to point number one, stay on top of your studying, figure out how you can break up the research, and then just like finding ways within your day to do the research. And then my last piece of advice about like really optimizing your opportunities is making sure that you deliver because the more you deliver, the more opportunities you're going to get in research. So if you sign up for something, make sure that the project just doesn't like, fall away or fall by the wayside or anything like that, but like really seeing it through from beginning to end. Only reaching out if you have a question that you've tried to troubleshoot and you can't solve. So definitely don't reach out about something you can like look up on Google, like, go and make sure that like you try your best to solve it out and then like, reach out to the mentor if need be, figuring out kind of like the mentor's preference, whether they want like, interval updates or whether they just want you to have the final product there. So just kind of being the best worker that you can and really meeting those expectations because then that'll give you more opportunities.
Thank you. I really appreciated it.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much for this other like answer. It was really interesting. We have a question from Kyla. So thank you. My questions, Dr. Bauman, do you recommend students primarily perform research in neuroscience if we are interested in neurosurgery residency?
So I would say it depends what level you're at. I think that so if you're a pre-medical student, I would say it doesn't necessarily matter as much, kind of the goal about like, or here, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. If you can, yes, as a pre-medical student, but I think that as a pre-medical student, it's more important to get good research foundation and principles. As a medical student, if you're interested in neurosurgery from an early standpoint, I would say, yeah, definitely try to like do it within neurosurgery. So not just neuroscience, but like neurosurgery specifically, because the reason why they want to see research, at least in neurosurgery, is it's a way to show your interest and engagement within the field, that you're trying to learn more about the field, but then you can also contribute meaningfully into the field because again, this is an area that just has so much opportunity for research advancement. If you have previous research, though, that's not neurosurgery related, like that's still valuable. Like another goal about research is to show that you're able to do the scientific method, that you're able to like really show a project from beginning to end. And so that's where, like I said, I think it like if you're the pre-medical student, it doesn't necessarily matter as much. Have good quality research. If you're a medical student and you know for sure you want to do neurosurgery, then I would recommend, yes, do neurosurgery research, not just generic neuroscience research, kind of for those reasons I listed.
Perfect.
you.
Thank you. Thank you once again. I have one question because like something that caught my attention is that both of you and your partner matched into an extremely competitive specialty. So do you have any tips for couples going through the match together,
Yeah.
especially when they're pursuing competitive specialty like you two?
For sure. And so, yes, it was very competitive specialties and was a very stressful match to go through. So something that we actually kind of like figured out that worked really, really well for us was we actually did our sub-Is and our weight rotations at the same time at the same place. And so I remember asking other people who have gone through the couples match if they thought that was important. And they're like, oh, I don't know, like maybe it helped, maybe it didn't. But what I actually found is that it helped us out a lot in order to coordinate that. It really allowed programs to kind of see us as an entity at the exact same time. And so then they would know whether they kind of wanted to take us both on or whether, they didn't. Hopefully, they wanted to do the former where they wanted to take us both on. But just kind of like knowing that like we're a pair, like we come together. There's no question about that. And so then at the same time for our application, like I was very honest about the couples match. Like I checked the box saying, yes, I am in the couples match. I said, here's my husband's name. Here's his AMCAS ID. I didn't put it in my personal statement, but anywhere that like I could mention it, I was very transparent about it. And then the same thing with the interviews. Like if it didn't come up during an interview, at least with the program director and the chair, I would say before exiting, saying, oh, by the way, like my husband, he's couples matching. We have an interview here, or he's got his interview on this date. Like I'll let you know, or I'll keep you updated about like kind of his thoughts at the end of it. Again, just like really making it, I thought it was most helpful to make it obvious and transparent that we were couples matching and not trying to hide it. One thing I wish that we would have done a little bit more is there's a lot of advocacy that can go into the couples match. So, neurosurgery interviews released before ENT ones did. So then at the time, we sent the message to the ENT program saying like, my wife has a neurosurgery interview here. I would love to get an interview here. So we tried to advocate that way. One thing I wish I would have done though is send the neurosurgery programs an email saying like, my husband has applied here. We would love to get him an interview on the ENT side. Obviously, better wording than that. And I think that's something that, can help translate into more interviews because ultimately with the couples match, you're just trying to get as many iterations as possible of like places that are overlapping so that hopefully you're in the same city. And so I probably would have been like a little bit more aggressive, yet again, respectful though, with advocating for us to get interviews at the same place would be kind of like my one other piece of advice or lesson learned.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Hey, Megan, this has been an incredible session. You gave us so much insight, shared your incredible experience, and answered all our questions in such a clear and honest way. So thank you so much for being with us today. We are all wishing you the best of luck as you start this next chapter at Washington University.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for everyone attending and asking all of your wonderful questions. It's been a great evening.
Thanks
Thank
to
you,
you.
Megan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megan.
Okay, all right, everyone, that's the end of today's virtual shadowing session. If you have any questions or want more information, feel free to reach out to MedSchool Mentor. And thanks again and see you soon.